There's a concept I'd like to talk about for a minute. If you have a dog, and the dog does something bad, like chew on your new shoes, how do you get the dog to stop doing that? Positive reinforcement is generally viable when getting a dog to do something you want. If you give a dog a treat, he'll start to correlate whatever he is doing with being fed a treat, so he'll just keep doing that thing. But that isn't going to fix this problem. If anything, supporting the dog's actions are going to make this a lot worse. So what about negative reinforcement? If you punish the dog after it does something, then hopefully the dog will just stop doing that thing, because getting spray bottled loses its luster after the 15th time. So you use negative reinforcement to get the dog to stop chewing on your Crocs, and everything works out perfectly. But why was the negative reinforcement so much more effective than the positive reinforcement? A psychologist by the name of B.F Skinner had the same question, and devoted a lot of his academic career to testing his theories related to positive and negative reinforcement. Here's some background of this individual. Skinner's upbringing is tied to
Susquehanna,
Pennsylvania. Skinner enrolled at Harvard at the age of 24, studied lots of other psychologists and their work, Pavlov being the most prominent, as he is one of the bigger inspirations for Skinner's own studies. And he published a book called The Behavior of Organisms, in which he discussed the topic of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is to associate a voluntary behavior and a consequence, and is intended to contrast classical conditioning, which is to associate an involuntary behavior and a consequence. Let's look at a real-world example of this kind of form of conditioning that Skinner pioneered. Rats are very common with lab tests, and were some of the primary subjects that Skinner used when he did his experiments. Yale University put together a test in 1948 called Motivation and Reward in Learning, in which two rats, one with a lot of food and another rat who was starved, were both put in two very similar scenarios.
In order to see whether the difference in drive will produce a difference in learning, we're going to use an apparatus with two identical compartments.
The compartments were designed to have functional food dispensers that each rat would interact with in order to be given food.
This consists of a stirrup-shaped bar placed above a food dish. Pressing the bar delivers a small pellet of food into the dish immediately below.
The goal of this experiment was to see the differences in behavior and learning ability between these two rats, one of which suffered from severe hunger while the other did not.
The hungry animal remains active, but as the satiated one becomes adapted to the new environment, he settles down and becomes inactive. But even if he had hit the bar and got a pellet, food would not be a reward without the drive of hunger. The hungry rat is active. He stands up near the bar, but just misses it.
The nuance of this experiment comes with the understanding that each rat can satiate their own hungers at any time. But because of how acquiring said food is dependent on the rat's ability to do so, it becomes a problem for the hungry rat.
The correct response of pressing the bar cannot be rewarded and learned until it occurs. He approaches the food device, stands up near the bar, presses it, but since he does not see the pellet and the food cup, he is not rewarded.
The rat's goal in this scenario is to experience operant conditioning, to learn the functionality of the new world around him and find a way to sustain himself, which...
At last he hits the bar and gets an immediate reward. Has he learned? Will it take him as long to press the bar the next time? Although the animal still makes quite a few irrelevant responses, he presses the bar much sooner the second time. The occurrence of a single reward has strengthened the tendency to make the response of pressing the bar.
The rat, through its own experience, learned, adapted, and most importantly, conditioned himself to use the food dispenser when he was hungry. Later tests involve putting the rat in uncomfortable situations that force learning, like applying a shock to the ground that the rat is standing on to make it react. But despite these last tests, the first one with the food dispenser is the easiest way to explain and depict Skinner's conditioning method, and the results that come from testing it on animals. Even though this test I've just shown you wasn't produced by Skinner himself, the method and expectation of the Yale University scientists were formed from Skinner's conditioning studies and the latent results of his research. Skinner's studies and beliefs about conditioning have shaped the way in which we analyze and train people or animals. From training unruly dogs to preparing soldiers in the military, Skinner's work still has a lasting effect to this day.